Okay, so the first question that came through for this week, what is the relationship between assertion and negation? So assertion and negation, or negation assertion is how it's more usually described, is a spiritual practice which is designed to move you away from an ego-based identity. In fact, that's what spirituality is. Spirituality is the movement away from ego-based identity. Like all practices, it is based on a particular principle. So what is the principle that it's based on? So for that, we'll turn to the first mantra of the Isha Vasya Upanishad. It reads, Om. All this, whatsoever in the changing universe, is pervaded by the Lord. So the word Lord here is used to indicate the reality, the unconditioned consciousness, your true self, or the other word that's used is Brahman, the Sanskrit. And you'll see these are all capitalized to indicate the absolute. So it's saying that whatever we experience in the changing universe is pervaded by reality, pervaded by consciousness. So it's saying that the entire cosmos is nothing other than the single reality. There's a couple of analogies that we use to get our heads around this. The first is that of the dreamer and the waker. When you wake up from the dream, you recognize that everything in the entire dream cosmos was nothing other than the waker's mind. Fibers and fibers of the waker's own consciousness. The other analogy that we use, and take a step back, that includes the object, the world of the dream, and it includes the subject, the dreamer, him or herself. The other analogy that we use is ocean and waves. So we can use the word cosmos here to indicate the entire ocean that we see. So we can say that the entire ocean is nothing other than seawater. That includes the waves and the froth and the foam, the movement on the top, the depths of the ocean, which is still and silent. The whole thing is nothing other than seawater. We can, for the purposes of discussion, talk about individual waves, but we know that when we look at a wave, we're looking at this ocean of seawater. Every aspect of the ocean is pervaded by seawater. So there's a quote here from Aurobindo. He says that each human being is one with all others. So again, use the analogies to get our heads around this. Every being in the dream is one with all others because they are all pervaded by this dreaming consciousness. Every wave on the ocean is at one with all others because the whole thing's pervaded by seawater. So in a similar way, this principle is saying that we are all at one with each other. We're all essentially the self. That's not how we experience ourselves. We experience ourselves as independent entities. So this is what we mean by the word ego. It's that sense of separateness, that sense of being a separate entity to all others, separate from the world that I interact with. So that ego is subject to limitations at all levels of the personality, physical limitations, emotional, intellectual. It goes through suffering and ultimately dies. Just as a wave exists for a while and then perishes. But the wave doesn't perish, but the ocean doesn't perish. So despite this truth that we are nothing other than the reality, we see a falsehood. I'm an ego. So we need a practice to try and realize this truth. This is where something like negation and assertion comes in. So this is the principle that it's based on. To get an understanding of what negation and assertion is, let's move to the invocation to another text, the Atma Bodha. He says, early morning, I contemplate upon Atman, the essential self shining in the heart, which is existence, knowledge, bliss, supreme goal, fourth, which constantly cognizes the waking, dream, and deep sleep states. I am that indivisible Brahman reality and not the assemblage of elements. So again, there's this word Brahman. The portion I've highlighted here is talking about negation and assertion. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. So negation is to deny an existing belief. That is to say, I am this body, mind, intellect, individual, separate from the rest of creation. When the text says, I am not the assemblage of elements, this is a direct negation of that existing belief. So this is the first aspect of trying to realize this truth, is to undo the existing false impression. The problem is that all practices, all personality traits, all principles become counterproductive or toxic if they are overdone. So the practice of negation must be balanced. And of course, it is balanced with assertion. So one question which might be interesting to think about is, what is the counterproductive effect of negating without asserting? What does it become? So we can use the word negation to always talk about the positive practice. But if we overdo it, it becomes something negative. What is that? Okay, so maybe bear that in mind as we go through. So in order to stop that from happening, we balance it with assertion. So what is assertion? Assertion is the attempt to create a new belief, which in this case is, I am the ego-free self. And that's where we get this other phrase, I am that indivisible Brahman reality. So you're doing two things. They're two sides of a coin, or actually this is the answer to the question. What is the relationship between negation and assertion? They are linked by an underlying principle, and they are two sides of a coin. So when it comes to assertion, it's clear then that faith is an essential element here. We don't know what it's like to be an ego-free self, to experience ourselves as the ocean rather than the wave. Because we don't know it, we have to have a certain degree of faith in this principle. So faith is never blind. We're not forcing ourselves to believe something. It's a reasonable leap that we make after a series of independent reflections. So if we look back at our analogy, say, of the ocean and the wave, you can imagine the wave saying, I am not this limited shape, this limited form. I am the entire ocean. So before we can practice negation and assertion at this level, we need to have an understanding of what we are talking about. If we force ourselves to try and believe something that doesn't make sense to us, we're getting into suppression. So this is the downside of negation when it's done too much. We are negating what is true for us, means we are suppressing our own nature. If we continue to suppress our own nature, then all we're doing is getting deeper and deeper into the darkness. We have to turn our attention onto what we are, or what we would like ourselves to be, what we'd like to become. Negation and assertion can also be done at the more relative level, and we do this all the time, anytime we practice self-control. So when we are looking to achieve a goal, we need to practice self-control. So let's say you want to reach a certain level of physical health. The negation and assertion takes place anytime you practice self-control towards that goal. So for example, you say no thank you to alcohol. You're negating that urge, and you are asserting the goal or the desire for health. So you're concentrating on the goal, that's the assertion, and you're saying no thank you to any counterproductive urges, that's the negation. So in a sense, what you can understand yourself to be saying is that I am not my urge for alcohol. It's something that is in me, it's something that is part of me at this point, but it doesn't define me. I'm larger than that. And instead, I'm choosing to identify with my goal of health. I am the goal of health. And then you act from that basis. Second question that came through is, how does one differentiate between understanding and experiencing knowledge from a relative point of view? What does it take to go from understanding to experiencing? And does confluence of mind and intellect relate to the stages of gaining knowledge? If so, in what way?